Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works, proudly supported by Sparesbox. Today we're back here on the Mustang. It's been a little bit longer than we'd anticipated actually getting this thing back together. I've had a few life things going on outside of work, and it's actually delayed a lot of projects that we should have already been knocking over by now. But all those things aside, Empire have smashed the engine out, we've got it back together. Unfortunately, we didn't actually film putting it together. Like I said, we've got stuff going on. But I do have some parts here to explain actually what happened. So before we go jamming the engine in, we're going to have a bit of a quick rundown to explain what the noise was, how it happened, and how we fixed it. The parts we've got on the bench here are all from Barras. None of these are actually from the engine from the Mustang, but there'll be a bit of a visual aid to kind of explain what actually happened and what was making those noises we were hearing in the drag challenge video. This is our oil pump. It's basically the guts of the engine. It's what keeps it running. Obviously, as the name implies, it pumps the oil around the engine. Unfortunately, this particular pump, which was supplied from an aftermarket supplier, I won't mention their name because we're not about that, it seized the pressure relief valve. This is actually the second time we've had this same failure from the same supplier, so we don't actually use these pumps anymore. This is kind of what we were using in about 2019. Obviously, when we built that and when we built the Cresta engine, which also failed, we were using these pumps. This is actually the one from the Cresta originally, which that engine dropped the valve. Interestingly, that cylinder head was also from this same supplier. So obviously not having a lot of run with that supplier, but whatever, that's their problem, not ours anymore. So yeah, like I said, we've gone away from this company completely from using a lot of the parts they make and supply. We're now using all Empire stuff. They actually started making their own stuff because of similar issues with this same company. So yeah, now we use a lot of Empire stuff in all of our engines, as well as off camera we use some of their stuff as well in other projects. But basically the check valve in this failed, and in this particular pump, this one gave it no oil pressure at all, and this is the one that failed at Drag Week 2019 in that car. And then the one obviously that we saw again failing at Drag Challenge 2020, it seized in a point where it maintained some oil pressure, but the oil pressure was low. And also what we were seeing every pass down the track, we were losing about 2 PSI of oil pressure. So what that indicates is that the check valve was still moving in the pump to a point where it was seizing it open more and more every single pass. But that was the cause of the problem. But the reason we were actually seeing noise is because things like the timing chain tensioner and the lifter, these are both pretty heavily reliant on oil pressure. So the timing chain tensioner was losing oil pressure, and as a result, the timing chain guide was actually hitting against that, and that was primarily the tapping noise that we were experiencing. And also these lifters, when they don't get enough oil pressure, do also get a pretty high-pitched clicking noise, which we may also have been experiencing as well. But just sort of give you guys a quick rundown of basically the failure we experienced and what caused it. Interestingly though, the pump that was failing, even though it wasn't supplying a lot of oil to the top end, the bottom end, like the big end bearings and the main bearings, which generally indicate low oil pressure into the bottom end, they were still spotless. So we got away pretty luckily in that it was really only minor consumable parts that we were replacing. And as I mentioned, we were actually going to replace that oil pump anyway. We now use the Horsepower Junkie billet complete replacement pump. These style of pumps, they modify a Ford casting and then they die grind the oil pressure relief valve bore. They modify that, they kind of high flow it. But in my experience, I feel like they're probably putting burrs into that, and that's what's seizing those check valves. So highly recommend, if you are going to go down the modified pump route, that you do a lot of research and speak to companies that are doing it. The particular company that we use for this one, I'm pretty sure they were outsourcing a lot of their work, and as a result there was pretty low quality control. But yeah, the HP Junkie stuff's been fantastic for us. We've been running that in the Cresta for quite a while now. The new Cresta engine we're currently putting together also has one of those pumps, and the engine we're putting back in the car today is running one of those pumps as well. The benefit of those pumps also is they've got a manual oil pressure adjustment on them, so you're not stuck with the factory oil pressure that the springs sort of dictate. So if you do decide you want to run higher or lower oil pressure, depending on the oil grade you're choosing in your race engine or high power street engine, you can modify it so that you're still maintaining the correct oil pressure. But Omar's set the oil pressure where he wants to see it, so we're going to jam the engine in and we'll keep on going. We're almost at the point for our first startup, but before we're going to do that, we've got to make sure that our oil system is correctly primed. So basically we've just filled everything up as per normal and disconnected our crank angle sensor. So all we're going to do now is basically crank it and watch for oil pressure. Once we set oil pressure on our dash, that means we can pretty much kick it over and get it started. Also, another thing to note, because this thing sat for a while, we actually drained the fuel system. We've put fresh fuel in it. So we've got 40 litres of fresh 85 in it, and we can pretty much spin it over and it'll be happy days. Clipper up. Air pocket. We've had a really successful day today. The engine's back in, it's running tip top. Massive thank you to Empire for turning it around really quickly. Thanks also to Valvoline for their support as always. If you do want to grab Valvoline products, don't forget Sparesbox, BCW5 on checkout. Thanks for watching guys, and we'll see you next time.